In this chilling YouTube story, a group of friends recount the horrifying events that occurred during a late-night drive on a desolate road. They had just left a party and were heading home when they saw a young woman hitchhiking on the side of the road. Despite the creepy feeling they had, they decided to give her a ride. As they drove down the road, strange things began to happen. The girl seemed to disappear from the car, only to reappear moments later. The radio suddenly started playing static, and the headlights flickered on and off. The friends tried to brush it off as their imagination, but their fear began to escalate as the girl started to act strange. Suddenly, the girl vanished from the car, and the friends were left alone on the dark road. They were unable to find her and continued to drive home, shaken and terrified. When they arrived home, they learned the truth about the girl. She had died in a car accident on that very road years ago, and her ghost has been known to haunt it ever since. The friends realized that they had picked up a ghostly hitchhiker, and the fear of what could have happened to them had they not made it home safely still haunts them to this day. The friends could not shake off the feeling of unease as they drove down the dark road. The only sounds were the hum of the car engine and the eerie silence of the night. As they drove, they noticed that the girl they had picked up was staring out the window, not speaking a word. They tried to make small talk, but she remained silent. Suddenly, the radio turned on by itself, and the friends were greeted by a burst of static. The headlights flickered on and off, causing the group to jump in their seats. They tried to shake it off as a technical glitch, but the feeling of dread only intensified. Then, the girl disappeared from the car, leaving the friends bewildered. They slammed on the brakes and searched the surrounding area, but there was no sign of her. Just as they were about to give up, the girl reappeared, this time with a disturbing smile on her face. The friends were now terrified and urged the driver to speed up and leave the area. But as they drove, the girl continued to act strange. She would disappear and reappear, sometimes even popping up in the back seat of the car. They could hear her whispering incoherently, and the sound made their skin crawl. Finally, the friends reached their destination and pulled over, trying to catch their breath. They turned to the back seat to check on the girl, only to find that she had vanished once again. It was then that they realized the truth. The girl was a ghostly apparition that had been haunting the road for years. The friends could not believe what they had experienced. They sat in stunned silence, trying to process what had just happened. The ghostly encounter had left them shaken and terrified, and they vowed never to drive down that road again. As the days passed, the friends could not shake off the feeling of unease that lingered in their minds. They struggled to come to terms with the fact that they had encountered a ghostly apparition, and it had almost cost them their lives. One of the friends decided to do some research on the road they had been driving on. They soon discovered that it was notorious for being haunted by the ghost of a young woman who had died in a car accident on that very same road years ago. According to local legend, her ghostly presence had been known to haunt the road and even cause accidents. The friends were shocked to learn that the ghost they had encountered was not just a figment of their imagination, but a real-life entity. The experience had left a lasting impact on them, and they could not forget the feeling of terror that had consumed them during the encounter. As they shared their story with others, they learned that many locals had encountered the ghostly hitchhiker on that road. It had become a rite of passage for those who dared to drive down that road at night. Conclusion: this story is a cautionary tale for anyone who might consider picking up a hitchhiker on a dark, deserted road. It highlights the dangers of encountering the supernatural and the importance of trusting one's instincts. Once upon a time, there was a couple named James and Lily who decided to take a scenic drive through a small, isolated town nestled in the mountains. The town was known for its beautiful scenery and rich history, and the couple was excited to explore it. As they drove deeper into the town, James and Lily noticed that the people and buildings seemed to disappear as soon as they passed them. They shrugged it off, assuming that it was just their imagination playing tricks on them. However, as they continued their drive, the feeling of unease grew stronger. They started to notice that there were no cars parked on the streets, no people walking around, and no signs of life whatsoever. It was as if the town was completely abandoned. As they tried to turn around and leave, they realized that they were trapped. The roads they had taken to enter the town had vanished, and every road they tried to take led them right back to where they started. Panicking, they got out of the car and started to explore on foot, hoping to find someone who could help them. But no matter where they went, the town remained eerily quiet and empty. As the night fell, the couple found a small inn to take refuge in. They hoped that they would be able to leave the next day, but the next morning, they discovered that the town was cursed. They soon learned that anyone who entered the town never left. The townsfolk had made a pact with a dark entity to protect their town, and now James and Lily were trapped there forever. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. The couple tried everything they could to escape, but the curse was too strong. They were forced to live out their lives in the vanishing town, never able to leave or escape the horror that had befallen them. Years went by, and the town continued to vanish, taking with it the memories of James and Lily, and anyone else who had been trapped there. It was as if the town had never existed at all, leaving behind only a haunting memory of the couple who had vanished without a trace. As the days went by, James and Lily realized that something was terribly wrong with the town. They began to notice strange occurrences, like shadows that moved on their own, whispers in the wind that spoke of dark things, and an inexplicable feeling of dread that lingered in the air. The longer they stayed in the town, the more it seemed to draw them in, like a magnet pulling them towards a dark and terrible fate. They tried to escape many times, but each time they were led back to the same place, as if the town was alive and had a mind of its own. The townspeople, who had at first seemed friendly and welcoming, became more and more hostile as time went on. They seemed to have a deep and abiding hatred for outsiders, and it soon became clear to James and Lily that they were not wanted there. One day, as they explored the town, they stumbled upon a small, hidden graveyard. It was overgrown and neglected, with headstones that were so old the names and dates had long since worn away. But as they walked deeper into the graveyard, they saw something that made their blood run cold. There, in the center of the cemetery, was a dark, twisted tree. Its branches were gnarled and black, and they seemed to writhe and twist in the wind. Hanging from the branches were strange, unidentifiable objects, and as James and Lily approached, they realized with horror that they were human bones. Suddenly, they heard a voice behind them. It was an old woman, dressed in tattered rags, with a wild look in her eyes. "You should not have come here," she croaked. "This town is cursed. Anyone who enters it never leaves." James and Lily tried to run, but it was too late. The old woman's curse had already taken hold, and they were trapped in the town forever. Years went by, and the couple grew old and gray. They tried to make the best of their situation, but the town was an ever-present reminder of their curse. They watched as the buildings and people vanished one by one, until they were the only ones left. In the end, the town vanished completely, leaving behind nothing but a barren wasteland. James and Lily were gone too, their fate unknown to the outside world. But for those who knew the legend of the vanishing town, it was said that if you listened closely on quiet nights, you could still hear their whispers on the wind, and the faint echoes of their screams as they tried to escape their cursed fate. Years turned into decades, and the couple's existence in the cursed town became a blur of routine and despair. They had long given up on trying to escape, and instead, focused on surviving day by day. They had to find a way to cope with the hopelessness of their situation, and so they spent their time exploring the town and documenting its strange and haunting nature. As the town continued to vanish, James and Lily found themselves feeling more and more isolated. They were the only ones left, and it seemed that the town was somehow feeding on their misery. They were haunted by the voices of the townspeople, the ones who had welcomed them in and then turned against them. Despite their fear and hopelessness, James and Lily never gave up trying to find a way out. They searched for any clues that would lead them to the source of the curse or a way to break it. They read every book they could find and talked to anyone who would listen to their story, hoping to find some kind of answer. One day, they stumbled upon an old, crumbling building that had been hidden from view. Inside, they found an ancient tome written in a language they couldn't read. As they pored over the pages, they realized that it contained the answer they had been searching for. The tome spoke of a dark entity that had been summoned to protect the town from outsiders. It described a ritual that could be performed to break the curse, but it was dangerous and required the sacrifice of a willing victim. James and Lily knew what they had to do. They had to find a way to perform the ritual and break the curse. It was the only way they could escape the vanishing town and the never-ending horror it held. They worked tirelessly, gathering the necessary ingredients and preparing for the ritual. Finally, the night arrived, and they began the dark and dangerous ceremony. It was harrowing, and they could feel the weight of the curse bearing down on them. But just as they were about to make the final sacrifice, something unexpected happened. A bright light filled the room, and the curse was lifted. The town, once shrouded in darkness, was bathed in light. And as they looked out of the window, they saw that the town was no longer vanishing. The buildings and people were now solid and real. James and Lily realized that the curse had been broken, and they were finally free. They left the town, never looking back. And although they were scarred by the horrors they had endured, they knew that they had been given a second chance at life. Years later, they wrote a book about their experience, hoping that it would serve as a warning to others who might be tempted to venture into the cursed town. And although the book became a bestseller, some people still didn't believe their story. But for James and Lily, the memory of the vanishing town would remain with them forever, a reminder of the darkness that lurks in the shadows and the power of the human spirit to overcome it. It was a dark and stormy night as a group of friends, James, Sarah, Alex, and Emily, were driving home from their camping trip. The rain was coming down in sheets, and visibility was low. As they drove along the desolate highway, they saw a stranded motorist on the side of the road, waving frantically for help. Without hesitation, James pulled over to assist the man, who introduced himself as Mark. Mark explained that his car had broken down and he was stranded in the middle of nowhere. He asked for a ride to the next town, which was still a few miles away. The friends hesitated, but Mark seemed genuine, and they decided to give him a ride. As they drove, Mark was friendly and engaging, telling them stories and cracking jokes. However, as they got further away from civilization, the group began to feel uneasy. Suddenly, Mark's demeanor changed, and he pulled out a knife, revealing himself as the infamous roadside killer. He had been preying on unsuspecting motorists for years, and the friends had fallen right into his trap. James, Sarah, Alex, and Emily tried to fight back, but they were no match for the seasoned killer. He held them hostage, torturing and taunting them with his twisted games. As the night wore on, the friends began to lose hope. But Emily, the quiet one of the group, had a plan. She had been secretly working on a homemade weapon, and with the help of her friends, she was able to break free and attack the killer. In the end, they managed to escape, but not without scars. The experience had changed them forever, and they would never forget the terror they faced at the hands of the roadside killer. The friends had been on a camping trip for the weekend, enjoying the great outdoors and escaping from the stresses of everyday life. They were happy to be heading back home, but the weather had turned sour, and the heavy rain made driving conditions difficult. As they approached a desolate stretch of the highway, they saw a man standing on the side of the road, waving frantically. James, the driver, slowed down to see if he could help. The man, who introduced himself as Mark, explained that his car had broken down, and he needed a ride to the next town. The group hesitated at first, but Mark seemed genuine and polite, and they decided to give him a ride. As they drove, Mark was friendly and engaging, telling them stories and cracking jokes. They felt relieved to have been able to help him, and they enjoyed his company. However, as they drove further away from civilization, the group began to feel uneasy. Something didn't feel right, and they realized they had made a mistake by trusting a stranger. Suddenly, Mark pulled out a knife, revealing himself as the roadside killer. He had been preying on unsuspecting motorists for years, and the friends had fallen right into his trap. The group tried to fight back, but the killer was too strong and experienced. He held them hostage, torturing and taunting them with his twisted games. He would play mind games with them, making them question their sanity, and forcing them to play his sick and twisted games. The night seemed to stretch on forever, and the group began to lose hope. They had never been in a situation like this before, and they didn't know how to escape. The killer had taken their phones, and there was no way for them to call for help. Emily, the quiet one of the group, had been secretly working on a homemade weapon, using items she had found in their camping gear. She knew they needed to act quickly, or they would be killed. With the help of her friends, she was able to break free and attack the killer. In the end, they managed to overpower the killer and escape, but not without scars. The experience had changed them forever, and they would never forget the terror they faced at the hands of the roadside killer. They knew that they had been lucky to survive, but they also knew that they would never be the same again. As they escaped from the killer's clutches, the group ran frantically into the dark and rainy night. They were all shaking and scared, trying to process what had just happened to them. They were miles away from civilization, with no idea where to go or how to get help. James suggested they head back to their campsite, as it was the only place they knew how to get to. It was a long and treacherous walk, but they had no other options. The group huddled together, trying to stay warm and dry, as they trudged through the darkness. As they walked, they heard strange noises, and the wind howled through the trees. They were terrified that the killer was still following them, and they knew they needed to stay alert. After what felt like an eternity, they finally arrived back at their campsite. They were relieved to see their tents and belongings still there, but they also knew they were still in danger. They couldn't stay there for long, as the killer might find them. James suggested they start a fire and try to dry off, but Sarah was hesitant. She was worried that the killer might see the flames and find them. But James argued that they needed to stay warm and dry, and a fire was the only way to do that. As they sat by the fire, they talked about their experience and tried to make sense of what had happened. They were all traumatized, and they knew it would take time to heal from the emotional and physical scars they had endured. Suddenly, they heard a rustling in the bushes. They froze, thinking it was the killer, but it turned out to be a search and rescue team. The friends were overjoyed to see them, and they were taken to safety. In the end, the group survived their encounter with the roadside killer, but they would never forget the horror they experienced that night. They knew they had been lucky to escape with their lives, and they would always be grateful for their bravery and quick thinking. From that day forward, they made a pact to never take their safety for granted and to always be cautious of strangers on the road.